Hello, hello, hello. I'm glad to be back at the Coalition for Council Priests once again. And so honored to be included in such a, man, this is the most tremendous conference I've ever seen with so many, we have 2 days of just so many amazing speakers. This is the greatest lineup at a Catholic conference I've ever been. I hope you think so too. You know, a lot of people have been asking me, how's Germany? And it's kind of funny. You know, we went over there because of my wife's job, right? And I'm thinking we get over there, and I'm just going to do the trophy husband thing, right? Like, why should I have to work? I have money saved up. I'm just going to do the trophy husband thing, do what trophy husbands do. And so the thing is, she kept coming home from work, and she was like expecting like strange things to happen, like dinner to be ready, like dishes to be washed, and she didn't understand what a trophy husband was. So this went back and forth for about 2 weeks, and I just got fed up with it. So I went and started looking for jobs, and we're not. I'll cook sometimes, but we're not going to make this a thing. And so I applied for teaching jobs. I figured I was going to get this one. And but in the meantime, before the background checks came back and all this stuff, there was this Catholic pastoral life coordinator position opened up at the parish on base. And I didn't think I would get it because, come on, you type in David L. Gray, right? You're doing your research. You type in David L. Gray on Google or whatever, and what comes up? Mass nightmares, me making fun of liturgies, me calling Pope Francis, gay and the worst pope ever. So I'm like, who will hire me? So they hired me, and like, who doesn't go online and check? I kind of like lost respect for the priest there. Like, who doesn't check? And so I think God played a trick on me too, because I think that's how it happens. I had spent 2 years making fun of liturgies, and God was like, okay, I'm going to put you in charge of one. Let's see what you do. And I'm going to give you altar girls too. Let's see what happens. So it's hard to get rid of altar girls. It is. So it's been a work in progress, but that's what I've been doing in Germany. And so in today's talk, I'm going to try to connect a lot of dots that we've been hearing this conference about what's been happening in the world, how did we get here, and how did we get here so fast? And I think one way to tie those threads together is by talking about what's called the Masonic program. This is not a term that Catholics or Protestants came up with who have been critical of Freemasonry, but something that Freemasons themselves in the late 1700s and 1800s promoted as a Masonic program, okay? So, let me find this clicker. So that's how we're going to tie together the dots. I think this is really the missing piece of the puzzle. And I'm going to touch on a personal problem of Freemasonry in the Catholic Church, how we can combat it, because we do have a big problem in our ranks. An estimated 20% of excommunicated Catholics are Freemasons throughout the world. That's a big problem. In the United States, lately, you may have been noticing I've been focusing on a big problem we have in the Knights of Columbus. The Knights of Columbus are infested with Freemasons, more so in different chapters than others. Some are doing well, but there's some chapters, like I was just speaking with a priest in Georgia. He wanted me to come down to do like a tour, talk about this issue, and he wanted the Knights of Columbus to sponsor it. And then we arrived at the conclusion they probably weren't. Not going to do that because in Georgia, a lot of Masonic lodges and councils of Knights of Columbus, they're openly recruiting from each other. They're drawing members from each other. This is a problem nationwide. And like I said, you go back and watch the video I've done on that, where I actually go through LinkedIn, I type in a search bar, Catholic and Freemason, and just countless people have this in their profile that they're Freemasons and Catholics. And also the Knights of Peter Claver, which is kind of like the Knights of Columbus, but it's predominantly black Catholics. Same issue. It's a bigger issue with them because their leadership, countless Freemasons. And I contacted them, and I wanted to come up and do a conference for them. And they at first they were open to the idea, but then they just went silent. And they reelected the same people who are active Freemasons in the country. It's disgusting. For those who don't know about my background in Freemasonry, I'll briefly outline that. From 1994 to 2004, I was engaged in Freemasonry as humanly possible as you can be. And this is long before I was even baptized, even before I really understood what the Catholic Church was. But Freemasonry was my life. It was my moral code. It was my religion. It was the lenses through which I really understood how the world operated. And very early on in my Masonic career, I would say that I pushed through all the mainstream Masonic degrees that you would have heard about. I always knew that I would be a Freemason. My father was a Freemason. My grandfather was a Freemason. My grandmother, who was a big influence in my life, she belonged to a church called the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and that church was founded by a Freemason named Richard Allen. And for up until like the 1990s, every one of their bishops had been a Freemason. So this is just kind of the environment that I grew up in. And so by the time I was 24, I had received, like I said, I pushed through really fast. I had a lot of people who liked me. I had connections, and people kind of pushed me through. They knew that where I wanted to be as a Freemason. I wanted to be a Grand Master, maybe potentially want to be a Sovereign Grand Commander. So by the time I was 24, I had received over 50 Masonic degrees. I know that comes as a shock to you if you think there's just 33. But I had received over 50. By the time I was 26, I had been a worshipful master of a lodge. I had been a high priest of a Royal Arch chapter. I had been a worthy patron of an Eastern Star chapter. By the time I was 31, I had been the second highest appointed Grand Lodge officer there is, which is your district deputy for the Grand Master, which means you have a whole area that you're in charge of in the jurisdiction. I had become a very well-known Freemason in the Masonic academia circles. I had written several books on Freemasonry. I had been made a fellow of a predominant research society, and I had been a co-founder of another research society. So once I became a Catholic, so that's kind of like my Masonic background. I was, pretty, well advanced in that life. But once I became a Catholic, I had really never planned to revisit the subject, because why should I have to? Because the Catholic Church had, since 1738, just 21, 22 years after the new Grand Lodge system of Freemasonry had created itself, had clearly and consistently taught that you cannot be a Catholic and a Freemason or you're excommunicated. So I thought it was a settled issue. I had no idea that I would encounter so many excommunicated Catholics who are Freemasons. So since 2010, I've been engaged in the work of really trying to evangelize Freemasons. I haven't really been talking to Catholics, honestly, but I've been trying to speak to excommunicated Catholics who are Freemasons about this issue. I've been trying to speak to them in a language that they will understand, because it's the language that I used to be quite familiar with. And I think I have some success from emails I get from people. So my seminal work on the subject was that book, The Catholic Catechism on Freemasonry. And you can find out more about all the essays and master courses and videos and everything I've done in that topic at davidlgray.info or St. Dominic's Media. But let's get into the topic itself. In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. In 1890, Pope Leo openly advocated in his encyclical called From the Apostolic Throne for people in Italy to vote for the most conservative party in 1892 in a general election that happened that year on November 6th. And Pope Leo XIII was very successful in advocating for that. The left lost and the right won by large numbers. And Pope Leo, he seized upon an opportunity to take a victory lap by writing two encyclicals on the same day that was repeating his message that he had started in 1890, that Italian Catholics need to take back their country. And it's amazing. Just imagine if we had a pope today that just advocated for the political parties that were for the people, that just openly just got into the mix and told us how to vote. And could you imagine that time? Imagine having a pope like that, or even bishops that wasn't afraid to enter into the political fray and tell us how to vote. So in that encyclical, And this is, the English here is Guardians of the Faith. Kind of like Guardians of Tradition, right? but Guardians of the Faith was an encyclical that he wrote. And this is what he outlined as the accomplishments of, there's going to be 18 points here, and this is what he outlined as the accomplishments of the Masonic program. He acknowledges that these are the things that these guys accomplished in Italy and in other places. And as we go through these slides, I want you to look at these, and I want you to recognize that the same accomplishments of the Freemasons in the 1800s are the same accomplishments today we can lay at the feet of Protestantism, the anti-religion. We can lay these things also at the feet of the sodomite and scissor lobby. If you don't know who the sodomites and scissors are, it's a better name for the LGBT. If you don't know what scissors are, ask your friend. Or you can say that these are accomplishments of the new state religion, where, it's new state religion today. We have this cult, this religion, where we seem to worship our political leaders. Obviously, they're immune from the law. And we have a ballot booth that seems to have turned to a sacrament. They just tell us to go to the sacrament of the ballot booth and place your hope and trust in that, and it'll change your life. So all these things we can apply to them. For example, Pope Leo found out that the Freemasons were quite successful in the substitution of Christianity for naturalism. Naturalism is just not thinking that you need grace and God and his help, but that you could just do this on your own, that you just, by your own human reason, you just make yourself a better person. Check. Substituting the worship of faith for worship of reason. Check. The substitution of Catholic morality for independent morality. Very common today. Check. Substitution of spiritual progress for material progress. That's the world we live in. So this is the 1800s, and all this stuff still applies today. This is the program that the name has changed. It's no longer the Freemasons advocating for this, but other groups have taken the lead in pushing this same program to accomplish these things. Seizing church property, money, goods that have been squandered. This is an inside job now. This is the bishops doing this. They're the ones closing churches, seizing property and goods. They're the ones that are squandering our money on pedophile claims. The substitution of holy maxims and laws for the gospel with a code of revolution. Check. The insertion of atheistic doctrines and vile realism in schools, science, and Christian arts. Check. The reducing the number of priests by forcing an unnecessary number of clerics to serve in the military. Again, now this is an inside job. The bishops are doing this by canceling priests and emptying our seminaries. By closing churches, they seem to be intent on themselves reducing the number of priests in our church. Check. Substituting the sacrament of holy matrimony and funeral masses for civil marriages and funerals. And again, this is a product of this idea the Freemasons came up with of separation of church and state. Popes have always said Freemasons came up with that idea. And this idea now that the state is in charge of who's get married, in charge of where you get, you don't have to go to church to have yourself buried. You can do this in a funeral home. Check. The overall effort to lay aside everything, thereby replacing the role of the church in society. Check. In the 1800s, this is still going on today in the 2000s. Attempting to silence and discredit the Catholic press. Check. Inside job with us. Closed seminary monasteries and convents, but allowed Masonic lodges and sectarian dens to multiply. We saw this during COVID. Close the churches, leave Planned Parenthood open. Check. Gave rights of associations to all kinds of organizations, but denied the same legal rights to religious societies. Proclaimed freedom of religion, but exercised intolerance towards Catholicism. We just seen this at the Dodger Stadium. You can say anything you want to about Catholics that you can't say about anyone else. Check. Allowances for public demonstrations against the Pope, but denied the same rights for Catholic demonstrations. The encouragement of schisms, apostasies, and revolts against the legitimate superiors of the church. Again, this is an inside job now. We can reference back to what Dr. Peter Kwasniewski said today, what Kennedy said this morning about they're the ones that's stirring up division and apostasies with this liturgical war that they've pushed. allow for oaths and impious associations, but vows made for religious obedience and rebuked for being contrary to, again, this is an attack on the priests that we see today. So as you can see, I hope you can see, the Masonic program is alive and well today. Even though the names have changed of who's executing the plan remains in place. This is one of the links that just ties everything together. If you're asking, how did we get here? And how did we get here so fast? Why do they all seem to be on the same page about the same thing all the time? How are they all playing this long game? It's the Masonic program. Freemasonry as an organization, I'm not saying it's not a problem. It is. Like I outlined earlier, we have an infestation in the Catholic Church. It's still a grave sin to be a Freemason. We'll talk more about that. But about the Masonic program, this is a point that I want to make, that the Freemasons are not the people themselves as an organization that on election night in 2020 made this call. The call went like this. It was about 12 o'clock. Hey, guys, stop reporting the votes, stop tabulating the votes, stop reporting that on the news media, and start again in the morning. The Freemasons didn't make that call. They're not the people who told us to stop asking questions about the strange things that happened that night and why all the signatures on those ballots have never been critically examined. Yeah, they counted the ballots over and over again, but if you keep counting rabbit turds, they're still rabbit turds, right? Right? They don't change. The leaders of Freemasonry are not the ones who told us to close the churches, close the schools, but keep Planned Parenthood and Walmart open. They're not the ones who told us to get a vaccine. The Freemasons did not go to the Pope and tell him to endorse transgenderism and homosexuality. When I was a Freemason, you got expelled for, if they found out you were like a homosexual. It's in a lot of constitutions of Freemasonry, maybe still today, that's un-Masonic conduct of a man. That's not how men behave. If you notice, most Grand Masters of Freemasons are married with children. So Freemasons, a key principle of Freemasonry is building up what they call the Masonic family. We're completely against that idea. But the Masonic family is a key teaching over there. So being a Skittle is even weird for Freemasons. It is. It's a shame, right? And it's a shame that even, you're so evil the Freemasons think you're bad. That's bad. You went too far when the Freemasons think you're a problem. It's like ugly calling ugly, all right? So Freemasons are not the ones who have been able to get every country to recognize a sexual disorder and having their flag flown everywhere. This is one of the disturbing things I noticed in Germany, this flag flying everywhere. Freemasons, they've never been able to accomplish that, have their flag flown throughout the country, on state houses, on embassies. There used to be a time if you wanted your flag flown, you had to conquer that land. You remember that? You had to conquer something, right? Remember on a pirate ship? Remember pirate ships? I don't know if you guys ever been on one. But, if you're, pirates, they used to take over the pirate ships, and they got on a pirate ship, and they planted their flag on there, right? That's how your flag got to be flown. Not anymore, man. Not anymore. Or maybe, the Skittles did take over some land. Maybe, right? Or you had to go somewhere no one has ever been before. I'm not talking about the moon. But don't take advice from me. I also believe in mermaids and merpeople, right? But don't take me too seriously. But seriously, where is Sodomite and Scissorland, right? What's the passport? What's their passport? A bag of Skittles? A whatchamacallit? How do you get to Skittle land? How do you become a citizen? This is insane. But nevertheless, you see my point. The demonic agency that is at work in the world today doesn't have the same name it used to, but it does the same work. And we've been limp in the wrist against combating it because we've been blinded by how the lie is transmitted. So that one was a little small. I'm sorry about that. I thought it would be bigger on these screens, but I'll work through it for you. So, how has the Masonic program been transmitted and communicated to other demonic agencies throughout time? Let me outline 2 ways, okay? The easiest way to explain is by looking at the reasons why the church teaches that Catholics cannot be Freemasons, okay? And these are the reasons why. Freemasonry has its own moral law. Quickly on that, when I was a worship master, if I wanted to summons a person to a lodge, they had to come or they were expelled. What the popes have found out with Pope Clement, what he argued was that, well, what if on the day you're summoned to the lodge, this is the same day as a holy day of obligation. You have to choose. He found it to be completely immoral, antithetical to Catholicism. You have to choose which law to obey. Freemasonry balances adherence to irreverent oaths and grievous punishments. For example, each oath that you take as a Freemason, and again, I took over 50, I obligated countless men to these same oaths. In each oath, you say, you obligate yourself to just all sorts of variations of the death penalty, or weird things you do to your body. And at the end, you say, so help me God and keep me steadfast. You sell your soul to this false God. Freemasonry teaches indifferentism towards Catholics because it says in its constitution from 1723, it calls itself the universal religion, and it calls your religions your personal opinion. Freemasonry practices naturalism. Again, you can make yourself a better person. This is the consistent teaching, just 4 simple points that the Catholic Church made, Pope Clement XII made back in 1738, and for 200 years through 1 papal bull, 8 encyclicals, 1 apostolic exhortation, 2 canon laws. Freemasonry, where Freemasonry is explicitly mentioned that we cannot be members. Now, but let's talk about the transmission. The transmission is really the opposite. Freemasonry having its own moral code means that it evangelized its belief of the lie of separation in church and state. Only if one believes that the church should not have say or influence over the life of the state, then it therefore follows that the state can have laws that are in opposition to divine law. This is one way the Masonic program has continued. In my books and essays, I've written a lot about this, and I talk about how the United States should be called the Masonic States of America, because our founding documents are nothing less than pieces of Masonic literature, written by Freemasons and their allies. So when you look at the condition of our country and the condition of every country that has accepted the American idea, in the cities like Chicago that have always been run by Freemasons and their allies, you see why they have run into this desperate condition. Freemasonry balances adherence to irreverent oaths and grievous punishments. How this is evangelized? Notice that the Masonic oaths, as I said, bind you to a Masonic death penalty if you disobey the Masonic law. And you swear the oath to the false god. So this God you sell your soul to is the God of death, not the God of life. Because every oath we would swear as Freemasons, we never took obligation to give us life. No, it's always to give us death. So this God of Freemasonry is a God of death, not a God of life like Christ Jesus. So this is why we see just this reckless disregard of life at every stage of human development from the womb to the tomb. Does this world seem to you to be obsessed with life, or does it seem to be obsessed with death? Which one? Death. That's the key Masonic principle that's been transmitted. Freemasonry teaches indifferentism towards Catholicism. And this is something we've seen from the very beginning with Freemasonry, and we see it throughout the world today. There's nothing exceptional about Catholicism. You can attack it. But again, this is also an inside job. We have a pope who doesn't seem, I found no evidence, is an initiated Freemason. But we have a pope who has embraced the principles of Freemasonry as pope. It's kind of like Thomas Jefferson. He wasn't a Freemason, but through Lafayette, he was definitely schooled in the principles of Freemasonry, and that comes, you see it throughout his life. There's a litany of evidence, mountainous evidence, that Pope Francis truly embraces the Masonic principle of indifferentism towards Catholicism. He doesn't think it's special. He even told Protestants, I think Anglicans or evangelicals, that, no, you don't have to convert to Catholicism. Who says that as Pope? So he he definitely embraces the principle of Freemasonry, of indifferentism towards it. Freemasonry practices naturalism, and this has been transmitted throughout society. This idea that you can just change your own life, you don't need God and his grace, you can just fix your own self, read a self-help book, watch Oprah, do whatever, worship politicians, worship celebrities, worship self. And worship of self always leads to atheism, and it also leads to transgenderism, it also leads to suicide. And this has become normalized through the Masonic program. Another principal way that a Masonic transmission, a Masonic program has been communicated is through the university system. So these are some of the largest and oldest, and the Freemasons themselves call these the Greek Masonic rites. So Freemasons understood, Freemasonry is not like Protestantism. Protestantism is for everybody. Anybody who become a Protestant, right? Just say the sinner's prayer and never go to church. You know, you're a Protestant, right? It's easy. It's both horizontal, it's vertical, it's downward. Protestantism is accessible to everybody. That's why it's cultural. That's why it's harder to stamp out. It's just sugar with no substance, right? But Freemasonry never wanted to be cultural. It wanted to influence those who control culture. It wanted to initiate the elites. It wanted to initiate those who influence society. So in one way, they accomplished that by saying, okay, everybody's not going to be a Freemason, but they went through extreme efforts to establish, and these are just a few of them, to establish, these are just some of the largest fraternities and sororities on college campuses that still teach the principles of Freemasonry. How? If you ever joined a fraternity, I did. It's the number 8. But when I was initiated, I had been a Freemason already. I received all these degrees, so I was initiated, and I saw still the same Masonic principles, because one of the founders was a Freemason. And this is the same thing all the fraternities teach. They teach you, if you just follow these principles of honor, of manhood, of scholarship, of trust, and all these things, they never say that you can grow in these virtues by God and his grace. It's always by what? Your own human effort. It's the Masonic program, and it's been communicated throughout the university system. We have to be aware of that. These are where our leaders come from. These are where our teachers come from. This is where our government leaders come from. We call these people liberals or whatever, and we know they influence so much of society, but what's happened? How did we get here, and how did we get here so fast? It was the influence of the key Masonic principles. So I'm almost out of time. I had a few more things to say, but let me see if I can succinctly wrap the whole thing up. Also, I want to see if I could touch very briefly on just how us as Catholics, sometimes we make the problem ourselves worse, right? I want us to get back to just focusing on, when we talk about Freemasonry, I would like to see if we just focus on the key reasons why Catholics cannot be Freemasons. I think well-meaning, sometimes we get distracted by some of the sexy stories, right? Oftentimes I hear, people, talk about the 30th degree of Freemasonry, where the initiate is supposed to step on the crown of the French king and the Pope and the tiara. That was the case. Freemasons haven't performed that role. Most Freemasons never received that degree because you have different jurisdictions. I never received that degree because I was in a northern jurisdiction. It was only an Albert Pike degree in the South. But even in the southern jurisdiction who worked that, they changed that 20 years ago. So when we go around telling Freemasons, hey, you stepped on the Pope's tiara, Freemasons teach this. That wasn't the case. Freemasonry is a little more fluid than you think it is. They change things. And interesting, when they did change that degree, they invited Uncle Teddy McCarrick first he called the Freemasons to the Vatican to talk about this. And then they invited him to what's called the House of the Temple in D.C., and they showed him, they gave him evidence that they changed his degree. Now, we could talk more about later what Uncle Teddy was doing there. I don't know if some little boys were there or not. But the point is that, I thought that was fun. I thought that was going to be funnier than what it was. But yeah. Uncle Teddy with boys. It's disgusting. But they might have been there at the Masonic Temple. But that's an issue. But so, yeah, I'd like us to get back to just focusing on the issues, because we kind of lose Freemasons when we do this. If we stick with what the church teaches why you cannot be a Freemason, we won't fall into these traps of Freemasons like me hearing this stuff, like, oh, you stepped on a Pope's tiara. No. But when I hear that, you sort of, you lose credibility with me. Like, if he's lying about that, what else is he lying about? So we have to stick with what the church teaches, not these things that are very fluid that people who have never been Freemasons don't understand. So this is the point that I would like to make. And I'll sum it up here. And I'll just say, let's not be like Theodore McCarrick. All right? First of all, let's not dialogue with the devil, because he's far more cunning than you and I. And I think to successfully combat this Masonic program, we have to recognize that it's going to be adopted by the next person that's going to come, the next group is going to come. But we have to recognize that a Masonic program is not greater than God, and it does not have a place in the kingdom of God. So through prayer, fasting, and action, let us continue to reject Satan in all his works and false promises. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.